How's that for a slice of fried gold?
You think this is a fucking costume? This is a way of life.
I'll be back.
Just a flesh wound. I'm not gonna hurt you. I'm just gonna bash your brains.
Take your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
I'm sorry, Ben. I'm afraid I can't do that.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
I guess everyone's entitled to one good scare.
I was happy to see in the Discord, if anybody's not following in Discord, Todd, the conversation in Cinema Shock about theater seat choice.
Yeah.
Because I'd been wondering if it was just me, because with old age, it's been a problem that I either pick like the handicap, like the aisle behind the handicapped section, so that
you can put your leg up.
Yep, so I can put my leg up, or at least stretch my leg out. Because if I'm not,
what happens if there's a wheelchair there?
Well, no, because they're further up. I mean, there's still a space, like a walkway there, but you can stretch your leg out over the rail, or you have to pick the end because you can stretch your leg out into the aisle, and I have to pee more often than I used to. And I thought it was just me, but
no, it's not just you, Gary. We're old. We're getting old. Our bladders are getting weaker. I strategically pee when I get to the movies, when I get to the theater, before getting in line for concessions, and then I pick up my seat, I put my stuff down, and then I try to force myself to go pee again before the movie starts, so that I won't have to get up during it.
Hi, kids. I'm Todd Davis from Cinema Shock. I'm here to talk to you about rectal health. Rectal health is one of the
Wait a minute. This is not. I'm not talking about pooping.
I'm talking about pooping.
No, I'm talking about pooping. Now it's my turn.
Where's your preferred movie theater seat in the theater? Where in the room is your preferred seat, Todd?
I like to get somewhere in the middle. I don't mind sitting in the middle of a row.
I prefer the middle. I prefer smack dab middle of the theater, honestly, if I can, because this is what I was saying in Discord, is that that's where the sound mix is sort of designed for. When I was a kid, my dad we always wanted to sit in the back of the theater, and the sound sucks in the back of the theater because all of the speakers are in front of you. Right. Yeah, there's nobody behind you that can like kick your seat, but all the speakers are in front of you facing inward, and it's the worst place in the theater for sound. Either the front row, well, the front row is actually better.
The back row is for making out and blowies, and that's. I mean, I don't know what you and your dad were doing in the movie theater, but
we're doing that.
I like the middle, but I more recently try to go between the middle and like the middle third. Just because I like being able to lean my head back. That sounds weird, but like, no, I like that it's a big screen. I want to be able to
exactly. I prefer to be
crane
closer.
My neck, but like look up a little bit.
I want to be closer. Like the first row of the stadium seat where Gary's talking about is probably the best seat in the house to me. Yeah. Though sometimes I'll pick it when I'm picking my seats online. I'll pick some, if there's somebody near that, I won't pick there because I prefer not to sit near anybody because I'm antisocial and because I've just had too many bad movie theater experiences. But I prefer to sit closer because I'm in a movie theater for an immersive experience. Yeah. And I want that screen to take up the majority of my field of vision without, having to go to the chiropractor afterwards.
Right. Yeah.
Good. We're on the same page. So when me and you go, just
keep in mind that if you pick it, it'll never heal.
Oh, jeez.
What?
That was
the ice is going to break.
Oh, I was wondering how long.
I'm getting it out of the way right now.
Well, thank you. Talk about breaking the ice.
Yeah. We did it. We did it right now with this discussion about movie theater seating. So, hello. And welcome to Cinema Shock. I'm the podcast that explores. This is the podcast that explores the stories behind your favorite cult and genre films. I'm one of the hosts, and my name is Gary Horne.
And I'm co-host Justin Bishop.
And I'm Todd Davis, shaking hands, kissing babies, then using them as human shields wherever I go. Welcome and thank you for joining us for this Kreskin-esque episode, which is part 6 of our current series titled The New Flesh, the Body Horror of David Cronenberg.
The what-esque?
Kreskin-esque. Kreskin. Yeah. You don't know Kreskin?
No, what is that?
Kreskin was a mentalist who became famous for all his appearances on The Tonight Show in the 1970s.
Well, shit, Todd, how old are you?
I
thought you said Crispin-esque, and I was like, is Crispin Glover in this movie?
No. Kreskin.
Can you imagine?
Kreskin.
He definitely stopped. He was active between 1907 and 1982. Is that? No, that's for the TV psychic Criswell.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, Criswell. Yeah, he's in Plan 9 from Outer Space. I know him.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He was popular. Kreskin was popular in the 70s.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Imagine if Crispin Glover was in this movie as Johnny Smith instead of Christopher Walken.
Oh, he'd have kicked everybody in the face.
By the way, Kreskin's still alive, 87 years old.
Wow, good for him.
Yeah.
About that.
Good for him. So,
also still alive, Christopher Walken.
Yeah, he's still kicking. What episode? This is episode 6 of 7. So we're almost done with our series on David Cronenberg. And the last one we talked about, Cronenberg's most recent film, Videodrome, we talked about it on our last episode. It was released in February of 1983. And just for a little recap, if you forgot since 2 weeks ago when we released an episode, or for some reason you haven't listened to it, but are still listening to this one, Videodrome, despite high expectations, it was kind of a box office flop. It brought in less than half of its nearly $6 million budget at the box office. It brought in 2.3 or something like that. Like very, very low box office numbers for a movie that wasn't really a high budget anyway. But yeah, it was a disappointment. This was a movie that was supposed to be Cronenberg's kind of big breakthrough. It was a movie that he had the support of a major Hollywood studio, and it was supposed to kind of bring him towards the mainstream a little bit more. He's been inching towards it ever since probably at least The Brood, or especially Scanners. He's been inching towards the mainstream. This was supposed to be the movie that, he had Debbie Harry and a big star, at the time. And that didn't really happen.
Well, it's because it crisscrossed with the big Hollywood movement of VHS belly pussies that they were working on, and just it fell flat.
So I don't know.
Belly pussies, new band name, I call it.
Tummy pussies. Tummy pussies.
VHS belly pussies.
But so that never really happened. It didn't become his commercial breakthrough that he was expecting it to be, or that everyone was expecting it to be. But the good news is that didn't really have a chance to hurt Cronenberg's career prospects, because by the time that Videodrome hit theaters, Cronenberg was already a month into filming his follow-up feature. So it didn't keep him from getting his next job, because he already had his next job ready to go and he was already working it. And that was a film that would, in fact, end up being the big mainstream breakthrough that it was hoped that Videodrome would be. The film we're talking about is also unique in that it is Cronenberg's first adaptation of pre-existing material. Something that, if you look over his filmography going forward, is kind of a regular occurrence. I was looking over his basically every movie he's made past this, and only I think 2 of those movies are not based on a pre-existing work of some kind after this. Because of course the movie we're talking about, next week, The Fly, is based on a pre-existing movie. But most of them are based on books or plays, mostly books, with the exception of Existence and I think Cosmopolis, but don't quote me on that. And one of his later ones is also an original script from him, but everything else is based on something else going forward. This particular movie that we're talking about, though, it was one of a rash of projects based on the work of Stephen King that were being released in the early 1980s. This was the golden age of Stephen King adaptations.
Oh yeah.
And this movie was a big part of that. And the movie we're talking about is, of course, The Dead Zone.
If the future were in your hands.
My daughter's screaming. The house is burning.
Would you change it?
Hurry up! It's not too late.
Touch this man's hand, and you are in the grip of the dead zone.
I've had another episode.
Only the imagination of author Stephen King could take you there.
Johnny, wait.
with a power that alters the future lives of those you love
You want to kill your own son?
I want you out of here.
I'm scared, Dad.
or of those you fear.
I have had a vision that I am going to be president of the United States someday, and nobody,
I mean nobody.
gonna stop me.
Is it a power for good or for evil?
If God has seen fit to bless you with this gift, you should use it.
Bless me?
You're a devil.
Stephen King, The Dead Zone.
The ice is going to break.
Twice. Let's keep a count.
I'm going to kill it. Todd, I don't know if you were saving it for later, but if you were going to do like a Johnny has the keys.
There's so much you could do.
Something else. I was wondering.
The main character is named Johnny. There's so
I know,
many options.
I know. Well, I was wondering if all of us were going to end up doing a Christopher Walken impression at some point. Justin, do you have one?
I don't have one, but I knew coming into this that Gary was going to overuse his Christopher Walken impression.
Listen, I figured it would happen at some point, but I was going to be conscious of it. Like I was, no. But I mean, the ice
Gary,
is
I
going
love
to
it.
break.
I
don't know
love
how
it,
many,
and I'm going to encourage you to use it more.
I don't know how many reviews I read for the somebody needs a nap section that was the title of the review was the ice is going to break. And so I'm like, all right, this is a thing, and I'm just going to get it out of the way right up top.
Would you do all the readings of the someone needs a nap in the Christopher Walken impression?
Oh, please do.
Oh my God, we could try. Yeah, I'm for it.
Listeners, you have that to look forward to in about an hour. So, all right. So by 1979, when the Dead Zone novel was released, Stephen King was already on his way to becoming the phenomenon that we know him as now. So the Dead Zone was King's seventh novel. It was the fifth one published under his real name. He had done a few under the name of Richard Bachman. But while his previous books were successful, The Dead Zone was his most popular yet. It was the first to rank among the 10 best-selling novels of the year in the U.S., the first to appear as a New York Times bestseller. Like this was, a legitimate hit for Stephen King. Not long after it was published, Lorimar Film Entertainment bought the rights and began developing a film adaptation. So at that time, Brian De Palma's Carrie was actually the only King adaptation that had been released. But it was such a smash hit that it not only solidified King's career as a novelist, but made his other works hot properties. And I'm not going to get really into the history of Stephen King too much here. I think that might be something we save maybe for a Carrie episode down the line.
I was going to say, probably despite how much you probably want to.
I know. I
would do a whole podcast about Stephen King. If you don't know Stephen King's history, like Carrie, when it came out in hardback, was not a huge hit. It did okay, but there weren't a lot of hardcover copies of Carrie published. In fact, if you can find a first edition Carrie hardcover, it is worth an incredible amount of money because there were so few. But when it got adapted into Brian De Palma's film, it made the book incredibly popular. So the paperback sales of Carrie are actually what made Stephen King's career. Like that, like he owes his career to Brian De Palma's adaptation of Carrie.
So he's always got that movie connection. That's cool to know.
Yeah. So later in 1979, the second King adaptation, Salem's Lot, directed by Tobe Hooper, was released as a television miniseries. If you want more info on that, I guess go and listen to our entire episode that we did on Salem's Lot back early on in Cinema Shock history.
Yeah.
But in between the years of between 1979, when the rights to The Dead Zone were purchased, and 1983, when the film was eventually released, several other King adaptations had been released, including Stanley Kubrick's The Shining in 1980, George Romero's Creep Show in 1982. We did an episode on that one as well. And Louis Teague's Cujo in early 1983. And by the time the year was over, John Carpenter's adaptation of Christine would also be released a mere 6 weeks after The Dead Zone. It came out in December of that year. Nice. And then a couple more would come out later. I think the following year was, I know Firestarter came out the following year. I feel like there was even another one in 1984. Anyway, there are a lot of Stephen King stuff coming out around this time. So the point being that Stephen King was a hot property at the time of The Dead Zone's release. Like he was at the top of his game.
Yeah. I didn't realize how rich that motherfucker might be. Like, I don't
Stephen
know.
King,
Yeah.
the most successful American author in history.
Well,
right.
I mean, yeah, I don't know. It just, I was seeing the stuff about, for like, he was a writer in residence at the University of Maine. So imagine being a college student and then he gets a deal for like Firestarter, Cujo, and this one for like $2 million.
Yeah.
With New American
I think he was still a teacher when he got the deal for this, I believe, right?
Yeah, I believe that's right. And this was 1977. So, and I just literally looked this up. So adjusted for inflation, like today's money, 1 million is about 4,681,000.
So we're talking $10 million.
Yeah, for these three
equivalent.
books. So like, yeah, and it's just that's insane to me.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then it was like his first. This one was actually his first, New York Times hardcover bestseller, and then. Like that, I don't know. I just thought that was really interesting. Also thought it was interesting because I went down a rabbit hole, and I'm not going to spend any time talking about this guy because I think he's been thoroughly pretty debunked. But this Peter Hurkos guy is what he based the novel on. Was a
I don't know anything about this.
Oh yeah, Johnny was supposedly inspired by this guy. He was a psychic detective, and he
like real life.
Like real
life guy.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he got like TV shows and stuff, but like he helped with the Boston Strangler case and stuff like that. And supposedly kind of detailed what the guy looked like and stuff like that. Just kind of interesting. But that was like one of his inspirations here. His other thing was like,
what's the guy's name again?
Peter Hurkos, Hurkos.
Interesting.
But he also said that his real interest in the story would be that like, if you had the power to like touch people and read them, that you would actually be rejected. It would be more of a curse than it would be a blessing most of the time. Some X-Men shit. He also had an interest in the religious stuff, which I saw a bunch of reviewers get, and I didn't think about it that much, even though I like connecting things to religion and all that sort of thing. But I saw an interview with him in the Minneapolis Star in '79. He said, I see a correlation between the religious idea and the psychic idea, since they are both a sort of struggle for power by people who are powerless. I don't know. I think the religion aspect of it, I haven't read the book. You probably have, Justin, but apparently there's more religious stuff in the book.
There's a lot more religious stuff in the book, especially in relation to Johnny's mother. She kind of becomes a religious nut in the 5 years that he's in a coma, which mothers with a religious crazy streak, for lack of a better term, are a pretty common occurrence in Stephen King's books. If you've seen Carrie, even the movie, then you know what I'm talking about. But that is I don't know what went on in Stephen King's life with his own mother that spawned that, but it's a pretty regular thing.
Yeah, I'm even thinking of like The Mist with that chick, and there's like a lot of religion stuff in Stephen King stuff. But I also thought it was funny. I know we're not talking about Stephen King, but I also just thought it was funny.
We're going to be talking about Stephen King. It's a Dead Zone episode, but
I read a lot this time around about, because I never thought about it before, but just how other writers felt about Stephen King.
They thought he was a hack almost, or like, his books were not at the time seen as like literature. He was writing fluff compared to what a lot of quote unquote intellectuals, writers and literary people thought. They kind of look down on him a little bit.
Could you say he's almost, obviously not just the way you described it, but like to me, I was thinking of like a Spielberg or something.
He's
making
something for the masses. Yeah, he's making stuff for the masses, but I don't know that was ever his intention. That's just sometimes their style just people gravitate towards a little bit more, and I don't think there's anything wrong with writing that kind of stuff. I'm obviously a huge Stephen King fan. I think we've talked about on the show before. He is my favorite writer. I own almost every book of his in hardcover. Like I've got a Stephen King shelf in my living room. Like I'm a huge Stephen King fan. And I think it's because he does write things that are incredibly entertaining, and he's got bad books. There are bad Stephen King books. I'm not going to pretend there's not. There's bad Steven Spielberg movies, but they're few and far between. They're at least going to be entertaining, even if they're not his best. They're going to be entertaining, And but they do appeal to the masses because of his style of writing, I think. And I'll get into this a little bit later on this episode, but I think one reason that his books appeal to people so much is because there's so much more to them than their hook. Like Carrie is not just about a girl with psychic powers. It's about her psychological struggle and the way that she relates with her mother. And his books are all based in character, right? And they might have some very outrageous things that happen, but he always focuses on the people first. And I think that the best Stephen King adaptations are the ones that remember that. And the majority of Stephen King adaptations do not.
I saw like one review with a guy named like Ed Gorman, who was like a famous author himself. But
he used to be a literary critic, I believe. Right?
Yeah. But yeah, he was. And so in the review, he was like going over, I can't remember if it was The Dead Zone or not, but I remember him saying about King, it was just like he would be perfectly hateable that he gets away with this so much if he weren't so good at it.
Right. Yeah. So when development began on the Dead Zone movie adaptation, David Cronenberg was not attached to it and would, in fact, not join the project until well into the planning stages. So when it started as a project, producer Carol Baum, she worked for Lorimar, who had the rights. She gave the book to screenwriter, a guy named Jeffrey Boehm, and asked him to write a screenplay. Now, Boehm, at the time, he only had one screen credit as a writer. It was a 1978 film called Straight Time, starring Dustin Hoffman, pretty well regarded, did pretty well. But he would go on, if you look at his career, and some of these that I'm going to name, he kind of script doctored or did rewrites on somebody else's script. But he went on to write on films like Joe Dante's Inner Space, The Lost Boys, Joel Schumacher, Funny Farm, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Lethal Weapon 2 and 3, The Witches of Eastwick. He also co-created the TV show The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. People our age probably remember that. Of course, we're big Bruce Campbell fans, so I loved Briscoe County Jr. But yeah, that was his TV show. He co-created it with Carlton Cuse, who was the co-creator of Lost.
Nice.
So I knew Todd was going to say nice, so I said nice first.
But this is early on in his career when he gets this gig. And not long after he began developing a script, director, a guy by the name of Stanley Donen, joined the project. Now, if you're unfamiliar with that name, Donen is the director behind some of the greatest musicals ever filmed, including my personal all-time favorite musical, Singin' in the Rain. He'd also directed Charade, which is another personal favorite of mine. If you haven't seen it, it's Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. It's an incredible movie, Charade. And later he started working with some like genre stuff. He got kind of away from the musicals as he's got older and did some genre stuff, including the cult favorite Bedazzled, the Dudley Moore version, not the remake with Brendan Fraser, I think was in it. Yeah, but the original version of Bedazzled. Yeah. His version of the film was to be produced by Sidney Pollack. Sidney Pollack's a big director, especially at this time. He directed Jeremiah Johnson, which is written by John Milius. That was his first big project. 3 Days of the Condor. Like, this was an Oscar winner. Sidney Pollack was going to be producing this. And reportedly, Carol Baum, the producer, had asked Cronenberg to direct the film around this time based on the strength of The Brood. Before finding out that Donen had actually already signed a contract to direct. So I guess they were kind of courting them both at the same time. And Donen joined. He said yes sooner, I guess. There are also some reports that, depending on who you ask, like Cronenberg says that they asked him early on and he just said no. But so I guess it depends on who you ask. Either way, he wasn't attached to it this early on. So a Stanley Donen version of The Dead Zone would have undoubtedly looked very different from the film that we would eventually get, but it wasn't meant to be. So due to a string of financial disasters, including William Friedkin's Cruising, I don't know if you guys have seen that, but it's a really great movie with Al Pacino. I would highly recommend it. But at the time, it was an expensive movie. It was a star vehicle for Al Pacino, and William Friedkin was hot off of The Exorcist, but it did not do very well. So due to a string of financial disasters like Cruising, Lorimar, they decided to close down their feature film division, which sort of forced Donen on to kind of move on to other projects. Other directors who were considered over the course of the film's development were Michael Cimino, who directed The Deer Hunter, starring Christopher Walken, among others, and John Badham, who, of course, Cinema Shock listeners might recognize as the director of Blue Thunder.
Oh, yeah.
Look at all these connections and how fun they are. I saw Donen for some reason, like in his script. It's probably best that he didn't do it, but he didn't want to like deal with Johnny's visions. Like
he didn't want to show them.
Yeah, he didn't want to show them. That's what it was, which is
weird which I feel like would have just been silly because it would have just been whoever ended up playing Johnny in his version, just like freaking convulsing out, like you see it, like without you actually saying it. It would have been really silly, I think, honestly.
Another thing I saw was really interesting was he was going to move the Johnny's character to like a college professor. So he was like it was scouting in the US and like they had landed on like Chapel Hill in North Carolina, which is just interesting for us Carolina people. But but that Carol Baum too, just for the record too, this was pretty early for her. She's been a workhorse producer, but she will get to work with David Cronenberg later on Dead Ringers.
Oh, nice. I didn't realize that. When Donen leaves the project and Lorimar kind of shuts things down, the Dead Zone goes into limbo for a year or so until super producer Dino De Laurentiis bought the rights and began to develop the project on his own. I feel like we've talked about Dino here on the show before. I feel like he's had some connections to some other movies we've talked about, and we'll surely talk about him a lot in the future. I mean, this is the guy, he did Conan the Barbarian, for example, and he's one of the most prolific producers Hollywood's ever seen.
Well, he'll always be an angel to me. Just for just for his connections to everything I love. So
yeah. But De Laurentiis, he didn't like Boehm's original script, and he asked Stephen King to actually adapt his own novel, but then he reportedly rejected that script as being too involved and convoluted. I think that Stephen King probably, from what I've read, kind of kept the structure of the novel, which we'll get into in a minute, a little bit more, which just doesn't work in a movie, the way that novel is structured. Cronenberg, however, says that after he was brought on as the director of the film, he was actually the one who decided not to use King's script because he found it needlessly brutal. This is coming from the guy who exploded a man's head in Scanners,
which is interesting.
And it was too brutal for him.
Yeah. I actually found another quote from Cronenberg where he said Stephen King's own script was terrible. It was not only bad as a script, it was the kind of script that his fans would have torn me apart for doing. It was basically a really ugly, unpleasant slasher script. The Castle Rock killer in the middle of the movie becomes the lead, and it was, let's show a lot of his victims.
Right.
And Boehm also agreed with that. And a quote from him, he said, quote, Stephen King had missed the point of his own book.
Yeah, I read that as well. I read that same quote as well. De Laurentiis also commissioned a script from Andrzej Zulawski, the Polish film director responsible for the 1981 horror film Possession. And De Laurentiis disliked that script as well, although I couldn't find details as to why. Zulawski, for the record, thinks it was the best thing that he had ever written. So I would really be curious to find a copy of that script.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
So at this point in the development, De Laurentiis realized that if he wanted this movie to get made, because it was kind of stalling at this point, that he needed somebody to oversee it. He needed to bring on a producer. So enter Deborah Hill. Deborah Hill, of course, she got her start in the industry by producing and co-writing John Carpenter's original Halloween in 1978. And she'd worked with De Laurentiis on Halloween 2 and 3, which he produced. So as fate would have it, Deborah Hill was she was in Hollywood, visiting director John Landis at Landis's office on the Universal lot. David Cronenberg happened to be in Hollywood doing some Videodrome business, some post-production. And he'd also dropped in on Landis, who had become a friend of his. And he was actually there because he, according to Cronenberg, he was wanting to kind of console Landis after the recent accident on the set of Landis's portion of the Twilight Zone movie that resulted in the death of 3 actors, 2 of whom were children. And I keep threatening to do a Twilight Zone movie episode on this show. We'll get to it one day so we can tell the full story of that. But yeah,
geez Louise.
She's tragic.
She had supposedly been talking to two directors. She was, or when she initially was approached, she says that she had mentioned David Cronenberg and Walter Hill as two people that she thought were perfect. And
Walter Hill would be an interesting choice for this, but I think it could work.
Yeah, he was tied up with 48 Hours at the time.
He was already signed on for that, I think. You know, it was kind of serendipitous that they both happened to be visiting John Landis at the same time, since she already kind of had Cronenberg in mind. She asked him, you know, point blank, she said, "Hey, we're developing The Dead Zone as a movie. Do you want to direct it?" And Cronenberg kind of, like, he says, like, he couldn't help but kind of laugh or smile at it, because just 2 or 3 years earlier, he had actually been offered the same job by Lorimer. Remember, we mentioned that before, that Carol Baum had offered that to him, but he had turned it down. But as he put it, he said, there seemed to be connections between The Dead Zone and me that were unwilling to be denied. So it almost felt like
fate.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
Plus, so he quickly accepted it, because he had just finished filming Videodrome, and he wasn't really up to the challenge of writing another original screenplay right away. He kind of liked the idea of working based on somebody else's work for kind of a change of pace, you know? So he met with Dino De Laurentiis, and the deal was signed, and Cronenberg would direct the film, and they'd be going back to Jeffrey Boehm for the screenplay, because none of these other guys that they'd got, King and everyone, none of these other screenplays were really working out. So they went back to Jeffrey Boehm to write the screenplay, although they would still go through a few drafts and revisions before all was said and done.
I wonder if it had anything to do with like scanners. Like maybe people just thought of like the mind fuckery of scanners, and they thought this somehow, I don't know. I was just thinking about that.
I definitely see a through line there. So yeah, I would not be surprised. So King's novel, if you haven't read it, it does have a very different structure than the film would end up. So in the book, King tells the parallel stories of Johnny Smith and Greg Stilson. Greg Stilson, the character that would eventually be played by Martin Sheen. Greg Stilson in the book, you meet him when he's 22 years old. He's like a door-to-door Bible salesman, I think. And the first time you meet him in the book, the house that he's at, like the dog kind of is aggressive towards him, and he murders a dog. So if there's one way to get you to not like a character immediately, it's to have them kill a dog. But that's how he's introduced in the books. You immediately kind of know that he's a bad dude, and you kind of follow his life through his developing political career. So the book jumps back and forth between Johnny Smith and Greg Stilson's stories and tells them parallel, as opposed to the movie, which doesn't end up giving us any. Greg Stilson doesn't even show up in the movie till well over an hour into it. So when Boehm started reworking the screenplay for Cronenberg, and Cronenberg, you know, he doesn't have co-writing credit on this, but he gave Boehm a lot of direction on like things to leave out, things to keep in, and kind of the structure that he wanted to go for. So Boehm dropped that parallel structure of the novel, and he just focused the story on Johnny Smith, waiting until, I mean, this movie is less than 2 hours long, an hour and 45 minutes long, hour and 50 minutes long. So we're over halfway through the script before that Greg Stilson character ever shows up at all. And
it's
then
so interesting. And they gave it to like Martin Sheen. So you like clearly know they cared about the character.
But, oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
But I don't know, it's just interesting. Yeah, you can see it. I never watched the TV series. I know we'll talk about that there are, but I wonder if like, because it feels like on like a regular show, you could easily do this version of it, like where they bounce back and forth.
Yeah, for sure. And I haven't watched the show either. I do know that Sean Patrick Flannery plays Stilson on the show, but I haven't seen
wow.
it. Yeah.
Nice.
There were other elements from the novel that were changed or discarded as well. One of the major ones being the definition of the dead zone itself. So in the book, Johnny he refers to this kind of blank area in his psychic imagery, a space that can't be foretold, as a dead zone. And in fact, he kind of like the way it's described in the book, it's almost like there's a black cloud in his vision that's kind of covering things up that he just can't see in his visions. And then at the end of the novel, this is something that doesn't exist in the movie, but at the end of the novel, it's revealed that the dead zone has actually, he's got a brain tumor, and the brain tumor is what has actually given him his power, but it also is responsible for blocking out certain areas. So here's a quote from Cronenberg where he says, I didn't think that the concept of the dead zone was very clear in the book. I wanted to make it more specific and cinematic. I never understood how the tumor concept connected metaphorically or how Johnny's condition was any different from anyone else who suffers brain damage in an accident, which I kind of understand that. I get where he's coming from. Although you do think that the brain tumor concept feels very Cronenbergian. This like growth in a human body that would cause this power. It feels like something that Cronenberg would want to keep.
You almost feel like he would have fucking put like a growth on Walken's head at some point.
Yeah.
Or like when he uses his power, like it bulges a little bit.
Yeah.
Like where was the bladder that he stuck on Christopher Walken's forehead? Like pulsates.
So Bowman Cronenberg threw out the brain tumor angle and re-envisioned the dead zone as something Johnny can't see because it's an outcome that is not yet determined, meaning that it's something that Johnny can change, which I do think that structurally and thematically is a good change. I think it works really well.
Yeah, it works in the story for sure. Cronenberg also didn't want to use the name Johnny Smith, by the way.
It's because this is the guy who does like fucking Brian Oblivion and like he's got wacky names, and Johnny Smith seems pretty boring for
supposedly in the book. It does say it makes a little quip about how fake that name sounds. So it's self-aware at least. Yeah. But yeah,
Bowman approached the story as sort of a triptych. He when he discusses King's book, he says that he found it longer than it needed to be, and said that it felt sprawling and episodic, which it is. But he used that episodic structure, breaking King's book into 3 distinct sections and approaching each of them as if they were acts in a play. Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. The first act is we meet Johnny pre-accident. We see the accident, and then the hospital scenes right after he awakens from his 5-year coma, where he, predicts the little girl in the burning house. That's all act number 1. The second act sees Johnny using his powers to help hunt down the Castle Rock killer. And then the third act is the confrontation between Johnny and Stilson. It's very distinct, I think, the way that it works.
Yeah.
And you've got some other episodes here and there, like within the structure, like the kid he's tutoring, Chris, I think is his name, where he gives the ice is going to break speech, that's in there as well, but it's not like an entire act of the film.
The ice is going to break.
Real quick, before we move on any further, though, because I neglected to do this at the beginning of the show, I do want to acknowledge a couple of sources for this episode that were kind of integral in some of the information that we have here. One of those sources is an article in Cinefantastique magazine by Tim Lucas, the same guy who was our main source for our Videodrome episode. In fact, in the very same issue of Fangoria, where he did a lengthy set visit to the set of the Dead Zone. That was a really good article. And then there's another one by Bob Martin in Fangoria magazine around the time of the film's release. Another pretty lengthy set visit from him. Both really good. The Cinefantastique you can find in their archives on archive.org. The Fangoria one's just on fangoria.com. Their Fangoria has been slowly releasing digital versions of all their old back issues on their website, and this is one of the scans, a very high quality scan, really easy to read on their website. So if you want to go read that, it's really good. I also listened to the commentary on the Scream Factory Blu-ray by Michael Gingold. Michael Gingold was the editor-in-chief of Fangoria for many years. He still writes for the current iteration of Fangoria, and he does a really good commentary.
God, it is too much. Like I thought, so I was going to play commentary in the background while I worked on other stuff, and I was like, well, maybe I'll just pick up a few nuggets. That guy is just blasting facts the whole time. And I'm like, holy shit.
And then the thing is, at the end of his commentary, he lists his sources, which are the exact same 2 articles that I used.
Nice.
Which made me feel pretty good, but it's definitely a lot of the same information that we're going over on this. I went through, I found some other articles and stuff in addition to that, but his main 2 sources were that Bob Martin article and the Tim Lucas article as well. And he gives full credit to them for his commentary. But yes, it's a great commentary. It's really good. I would like to see more commentaries like that. I love the commentaries with the filmmakers and stuff, but I really like when they get like a film historian in there to really like talk about the making of it, because sometimes the directors don't, depending on who it is, they don't go into enough detail, and the actors especially, their commentaries, they often don't go into enough detail to where I might get one or two facts from listening to a 2-hour commentary. But
what's funny?
That thing was a gold mine.
Yeah, and this is another person or another episode discussion, of course, but you get that a lot now. I'm starting to learn that, like, even with for my other day job in wrestling, even wrestlers, actors and wrestlers are not dissimilar. That, like, you try to get to them about specific details of a certain thing, they're like, man, I don't know. Like, I wrestled 300 matches that year, and I can't remember like everything that happened that day. Maybe if I go back and watch it, I can try to like fire something up. But
same with like if you get a David Cronenberg commentary on this movie, he's trying to remember things that happened 30 years ago, and then 40 years ago at this point. But I think the original commentary for his was recorded in 2006, so that was still 20 plus years past the filming of this. So I can't remember 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, same. That's what I'm starting to. I've been trying to like start like an audio journal, because I definitely am not going to write it. I thought I would write, and I'm sorry, we've deviated. But anyway, so I've started an audio journal of myself to like try to like keep in mind certain things. I think it was at the suggestion of Todd, like maybe last recording, where he was like, you should be like keeping up with this stuff. And I'm like, you're right, I should. And I'll forget things. I know I will. I fucking was late to this recording because I forgot where my phone was. So, so definitely I should record immediately after I do things.
All right. So moving on. So working with Dino De Laurentiis was far different than what Cronenberg had been used to when he had worked with, Pierre David and Victor Solnicki, the guys that he had worked with on most of his previous films. De Laurentiis is a notoriously hands-on and highly opinionated producer. And on The Dead Zone, he insisted on having the final say on the film's main cast members. Cronenberg had originally wanted Hal Holbrook for the role of Sheriff Bannerman, a choice that De Laurentiis immediately vetoed because he had never heard of the actor, despite the fact that by this time, Holbrook had won a Tony, had won multiple Emmys, and had become internationally famous for his role as Deep Throat in All the President's Men. Not to mention, he was about to be in Creepshow. so he has some genre cred as well.
Was he in Haddonfield, Illinois? Was he a part of Halloween?
That he was not. So De Laurentiis didn't know who he was, but he had already won like Tonys for his Mark Twain show. Remember, we talked about his Mark Twain show back on our Creepshow episode. Like, he was fairly well known, but Dino De Laurentiis apparently didn't know who he was, so he turned that down immediately. So as a compromise, Tom Skerritt was selected for the role, which is fine. I mean, Tom Skerritt is great. He's got some genre cred as well, because this is only a couple years after Alien,
My biggest fucking disappointment from this movie was when Tom Skerritt's name came up during that extended fucking intro that this movie has, that a lot of people love.
I think it's great.
Yeah, but it does last like 10 minutes. And
it was actually, those opening credits were made by the same company that did the opening credits for Alien.
That is correct. You're right. Yeah. Like we're playing trivia. No, but I saw Tom Skerritt's name and I was like, legitimately, I don't know. I know that I've seen this movie, but it was back in the same days that I was in like a shitty house in a historical neighborhood where you came to rescue me on Halloween from watching Jaws 4. Yeah. It was like around that same time. I remember I watched The Dead Zone then, but anyway, I saw Tom Skerritt's name pop up on the opening stuff and I was like, shit, Tom Skerritt, I love that guy. And it was the biggest disappointment to find that he is really like 10 minutes of screen time.
Yeah, he's not in it a lot, but he's good, and he's a very important role in the film. So for the role of Johnny Smith, the film's protagonist, one actor that was considered, I don't know how much he was considered, but Bill Murray, who was for some reason Stephen King's first choice for the role. I don't know what Stephen King saw in Bill Murray that and let me say, Bill Murray is one of my favorite actors of all time. So this is not me shitting on Bill Murray. I love Bill Murray, but I don't know what Stephen King saw in him as Johnny Smith, because at this time, Bill Murray had never done a dramatic role. Now he kind of bounces back and forth, although even his dramatic roles now still have this kind of sardonic like humor that Bill Murray is known for.
I'm literally trying to picture him right now.
I can't picture a single scene in this movie where I think Bill Murray would work.
Well, I think you should get the kid out of here. The ice is gonna break.
that's actually pretty good.
Nice.
Oh man, but anyway, that I don't know that Cronenberg or De Laurentiis ever gave any real consideration to Bill Murray. I think Stephen King just was like mentioning, they're like, oh yeah, we'll think about it. So but Cronenberg himself wanted Nicholas Campbell. Nicholas Campbell he'd been one of the main characters in Fast Company. He was in The Brood. He's Oliver Reed's like assistant in The Brood, so he's got a small role in that. But Cronenberg wanted him as Johnny, but De Laurentiis wanted a bigger star, which I totally understand. Campbell, of course, he did end up getting cast in the film as the Castle Rock killer, Frank Dodd. So he's got still a pretty significant role that I think he's very good and very creepy in.
He's perfect because he's dead inside. It works.
It works. He looks super. There's something about the way he plays the role that he really does seem like a guy who has he like a guy who doesn't make the distinction between right and wrong. There's something behind his eyes that just plays. And honestly, the creepiest scene in this whole film, and I just, not to get ahead of myself, but I don't consider this a horror film. But there is a horror-esque sequence, and it's the sequence where they visit the Dodd home, and his mother is there, and they walk into that house, and Mark Irwin, the way he filmed that scene looks very different from the rest of the film because there's this like green glow over everything, this like green light that doesn't really make sense, but it makes the whole scene feel icky and gross. Like Gary when he watches The Matrix, like how Gary feels the entire time, but everything's a little bit green.
I thought you were going to say like Gary, icky and gross,
icky and gross,
icky and gross like Gary.
But and then the scene where Frank Dodd commits suicide is the biggest like shock moment of the film, even though you don't see anything except for that one little twitch at the end afterwards, which is pretty disturbing, where he's got the scissor like in his mouth, and then Cronenberg cuts away. Like, it's one of those things where it's like, what's happening, and what's in your imagination is worse than what they could actually show you.
I was literally about to say, I mean, that shows you the sign of a good director, I suppose, because the restraint that he shows there for what he needs to tell you.
Yeah.
You're just like, this seems fucking awful.
Yeah.
That's all you need. Shown it. It's just the setup.
He could have shown it, but it's not necessary. That's not this kind of movie.
Yeah.
Campbell, of course, was one of several regular Cronenberg actors to appear in supporting roles in the film. Also making appearances were Peter Dvorsky, who plays Harlan in Videodrome. Remember when I was watching Videodrome, I kept thinking of him as, I don't know, like dollar store Jeffrey Combs. For some reason, this is what he seemed like to me.
Yeah, a little bit.
He had a Jeffrey Combs thing in that movie, more so than in this movie. But in here, he plays a TV reporter, the guy who Christopher Walken gives that great speech to when he's in front of the room of reporters, where he says like, I'm going to die, you're going to die. You want to know if you're going to die tomorrow. It's a great speech. It's really good. But that's him. That's Peter Dvorsky. Les Carlson, who was the main bad guy in Videodrome, of course. Here he plays a newspaper columnist, and that's actually a scene that got added in later on in the shoot. It wasn't in the original script. He's the guy who's getting blackmailed by Stilson. They've got pictures of him with a woman. That scene was actually requested by Paramount, of all things. It was a studio note, but it works really well because it's like a scene where they kind of wanted to see earlier on that Stilson is a shady figure. They felt like they needed to establish that. And I honestly, a lot of times we shit on like dumb studio notes, but I think they made a good decision there. And I like that when Cronenberg decided to comply, he brought in one of his regular actors in a very different role for the scene.
Yeah.
And even Cindy Hines, the little girl from The Brood, is in here. She's one of the kids that Johnny tutors. She's reading Sleeping Beauty in a scene. She's only in the one scene, but that's her. I guess we haven't really mentioned it, but as Johnny himself, we didn't get Nicholas Campbell, but we got Christopher Walken. And I'm not really sure how Christopher Walken got attached to this. I don't know. there are no like fun, cool stories regarding.
Yeah, I couldn't find anything either.
It was just like, he probably got sent the script by his agent and auditioned for it. I'm not sure, but Walken, I don't think we've talked about him on the podcast yet, but Walken, he had been acting for most of his life. He began his career as a child actor in the 1950s. But as far as feature films go, his career really began to take off in the 1970s. He'd had some small roles in Sidney Lumet's The Anderson Tapes, Woody Allen's Annie Hall. He's got a small but significant role in that. Michael Winter's The Sentinel. But then in 1978, he had a star-making role in Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter, for which he won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. If you have not seen The Deer Hunter, I would highly, highly recommend it. It's an incredible film. You will, if you want to feel sad. Good
about life.
You will be very sad when it's over, but it's a great film. And Christopher Walken is incredible in it. He's also in Cimino's controversial Heaven's Gate film from 1980, which is kind of the movie that is sort of known as the one who killed the whole new Hollywood movement, where all these directors were having carte blanche and as far as their budget and final cut goes, and that movie kind of destroyed that.
I found a quote from Cronenberg where he said what sold him on Christopher Walken. He said it's his face. That's the subject of this whole movie. That's what this movie was about. All the things are in his face. And which is interesting. I mean, but I'll say this. I mean, out of all the guys that, we've had the discussion in previous episodes about, is David Cronenberg intentionally casting these actors as the male leads that are a little detached? And Christopher Walken is absolutely perfect in that sense. Like, he tries at the beginning, and it's tough nowadays if you're a fan of movies and Christopher Walken. Who doesn't know who Christopher Walken is? So you even know the parody of Christopher Walken. So it's hard to separate those things when you're watching a movie. But
right.
At the beginning, he does his best job to not be the Christopher Walken that he is in the other half of this movie, in the other 2/3 of this movie.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, like, he's rarely the Christopher Walken that we know him as today, like the more cowbell Christopher Walken. He's much more restrained. He has this certain
otherworldliness about him that
he's a weird dude.
He can't escape. Yeah. He just can't escape it, but it works in this movie because the Johnny Smith that wakes up from a coma should be detached. He's a little outside of this whole thing.
Yeah.
And so it actually, I don't know, but Walken's charisma keeps you invested, even though this guy seems totally separate from everything else that's happening around him.
And I don't know that, like, we've mentioned it before on previous episodes in this series about the leading men in Cronenberg's films being sort of boring, like Cameron Vale. But again, I think that was fully intentional in that movie because, well, go back and listen to that episode for all the reasons on that. But I think you mentioned on Videodrome that he's definitely gotten away from that with the Max Wren character, because James Wood is not like a cookie cutter boring character in that movie. Then you've got Walken here. You're going to have Goldblum on the next episode. You're going to have Jeremy Irons on the next one. You're going to have Viggo Mortensen down the line, James Spader down the line. Like, he's got some incredibly compelling characters. And I don't know if that's just an artistic choice or because as he went further along in his career, he simply had access to better actors who wanted to do his material.
Yeah, that's what I'm curious about, because I still feel like he's got guys that are still like, again, detached a little bit. Like
I feel like the character here who feels the most like a character from a previous Cronenberg movie is Stillson's right-hand man, that guy and Frank Dodd.
Yeah, I would agree with that. But yeah, I mean, it works for like Cronenberg's sensibilities. Like, I feel like Walken actually really, really fits here. Like, and even with Woods, there's just something about those two guys that keep you invested that I think he was missing from some of the other movies, that, like, even though they're not normal,
right,
there's something about it that you can't help but watch them.
Exactly. It's the reason that Michael Ironside's the most watchable part of Scanners, because he's a very charismatic dude, and he's up against this guy who's kind of a blank slate.
Right.
So another cast member, we've got Martin Sheen as Greg Stilson. We all know who Martin Sheen is. Ramon Estevez. All right, Ramon Estevez.
Yeah.
That's his real name. By 1983, he was well into his career. He's fairly well known at this time. He'd been working since the 60s, mostly in television prior to that. But he'd already appeared in major film roles by this time, including Terrence Malick's Badlands alongside Sissy Spacek. Apocalypse Now, of course, The Final Countdown, which is one of my favorite, like, under the radar movies from the time, and Gandhi, so he's been in a lot of big movies at this time. And Sheen actually says that it was his sons, Carlos and Ramon Jr., who were largely responsible for him appearing in the film. He said, this is all from that article I read in Cine Fantastique. He said that his son Carlos in particular was a film fanatic. So when Sheen mentioned that he'd received an offer to appear in a Cronenberg movie, as Sheen put it, he almost shit. He couldn't believe it. I confess that I hadn't seen any of Cronenberg's pictures, though I'd heard of him. The next day, he had 2 for me to watch, Rabid and Scanners. Carlos Estevez, of course, is more commonly known by his stage name, which is Charlie Sheen. Martin Sheen had actually asked Charlie to play the role of the teenager in the audience at the political rally who photographed Stilson holding up a baby, the kid who takes the picture, who is his downfall. And he actually got the part, but as Sheen explained it, he hadn't been doing very well in school at the time. He was a teenager, had not been doing very well in school. So they all kind of decided that it might be best for everyone if he didn't take time off of school to play the role. So his brother Ramon, who's not an actor, the only Sheen or Estevez son who's not an actor, he ends up playing the character instead. And then coincidentally, Sheen actually followed up The Dead Zone with another Stephen King adaptation, one that's not quite as good, but Firestarter, the very next year. Martin Sheen's in that one too.
Charlie Sheen, sweet guy.
He also says he's
got tiger blood in his veins.
Martin Sheen, by the way, says he has a vision of being president, and he will be. He will. West Wing.
Dude, he's played so many politicians. He played fucking Kennedy. He played John F. Kennedy before this. So, yeah, he's just, something about him is just, people cast him as politicians. But the other major role in the film, as Johnny's long-lost love, Sarah, was played by Brooke Adams. Adams had started her career in television and low-budget movies, and her most prominent roles before The Dead Zone were another Terrence Malick movie, actually, Days of Heaven, and in the 1978 remake of Invasion of the Body Snatchers. She actually got the job because of Christopher Walken. They grew up together. They were friends, they met when they were, I think she was in like middle school and he was in high school. They grew up in the same area and they had known each other their whole lives, and they had appeared in a play together. So when they were trying to cast the role, Walken actually recommended her to Cronenberg for this role. And Cronenberg, of course, had seen her in Invasion of the Body Snatchers and thought she was perfect for it.
Also perfect to mention is that if you were wondering, like I was, Jackie Burroughs, who plays Johnny's mother in the film, is only actually 4 years older than Christopher Walken. So
yeah, they aged her up a little bit in the movie, because I think Walken was, 39 when they filmed this.
And
which
the character
is considerably
in the book,
older. Yeah,
the book character is like at the beginning scenes would have been like in his early 20s. I think he's in his late 20s, in the regular story. And so I think I actually did read that Cronenberg thought he was too old at first, that he had to be sold on that he was just the right guy and just to roll with it. But the lady who plays his mom was only 44 at the time, but they definitely aged her up, because that is not what a 44-year-old woman looks like, no matter how hard you've had it. But anyway, I don't know that any of these actors appeared in Star Trek, but Todd might be able to shed some light on that.
Yes, for this week's installment of Whom I Trekkin' With, besides Mr. Cronenberg himself, Helene.
Not allowed to mention him.
Okay.
No more. We know David Cronenberg is a discovery.
That's what I've been. I've just reduced it down to besides Mr. Cronenberg himself. That's all I've been doing.
Let me just say up front, if you haven't been watching Star Trek Discovery on Paramount Plus, Justin, then you should be, because it's very, very good. I just started the second half of the 4th season. I think.
Yeah.
And still so good. It's a good show.
Yeah, it's very, very good.
It's on my ever-growing list of TV shows that I need to watch.
It's dope. You won't regret it. So we've got Helene Udi as Weezak's mother. She was in an episode of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Rules of Acquisition. That's season 2, episode 7 from 1993 as Pell. And then Mr. Anthony Zerbe, who plays Roger Stewart.
Yeah, we haven't mentioned him, but he was also in the Matrix sequels.
Yeah, I've got that here. It's he was in Star Trek Insurrection as Doherty, and that was in
Doherty.
Doherty, yes. And that was in 1998, directed by Jonathan Frakes.
Is that one of the good ones? I can't remember.
Insurrection.
I'm not a big fan of it, but it's,
I feel like the because the TNG movies kind of kept the like every other one is good thing that the original ones did, right?
Yeah.
What are the good ones? Generations, First Contact.
A lot of people don't like Generations, but they like First Contact. And
I was going to say, I feel like the Next Generation movies,
but they like Nemesis. But
okay. I just remember liking Generations a lot as a kid, but that's because that was when I was deep in my like love of Star Trek and especially Next Generation, and it was the first one, and it was also Picard and Kirk and Malcolm McDowell. You know,
right?
Like, so
I when I recently rewatched all of them, that got me again.
Yeah,
where I was like, it's Picard and Kirk and Malcolm McDowell.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I like all of them, and with Insurrection being the least of my favorites.
Okay, so. Gotcha. Anyone else?
Nope, that's everybody in Star Trek.
Hey, come on, Todd. Are you meaning to tell me there's not one moment of number one? Engage.
I would love for Christopher Walken to be in Star Trek at some point.
Jean-Luc Picard. USS Enterprise.
This is.
I like that Todd. When Todd does Christopher Walken, it is very specifically Christopher Walken giving the gold watch speech in Pulp Fiction. Christopher Walken, like it's that version every single time. So like you got to whisper a line here and there.
Space.
Second start of the left. I don't know. Straight on till morning.
Space. Final Frontier. Crazy.
All right, let's move on.
These are the voyages.
All right. So the original plan was to shoot the film in New England, where it's set, as almost all Stephen King stories are. Not all, but most of them.
Yeah. Do they call him the Castle Rock Killer? I don't even remember that they said that in the movie.
They do.
Yeah, they do.
Okay,
yeah,
okay.
They call him that. And in fact, The Dead Zone was the first Stephen King book to feature Castle Rock, which became a regular setting. And the sheriff, who Tom Skerritt plays, Sheriff Bannerman, appears in Cujo, the book, as the sheriff who, spoiler alert, but he does get killed by the dog in the movie and the book. The movie is 50 years, or the book's 50 years old at this point. So I don't really.
Well, and I heard that like Dodd is mentioned in Cujo or something. As
Dodd is mentioned in Cujo and a couple of other books, like just in passing, because
like he was
a serial killer in
story.
town. Yeah, so it's kind of a big deal. Your small town had a serial killer. He is mentioned several times. But most Stephen King books are set in New England, mostly in Maine. There are some exceptions here and there, like the Mr. Mercedes books are all set, I think, in Ohio. And one that I read, like that came out year before, called The Institute, is actually set in South Carolina. So believe it or not, in a made-up town that doesn't exist, but still kind of neat. Anyway, that was a weird little tangent. So where was I? Oh, yes. So the original plan was to shoot The Dead Zone in New England, but they couldn't really find a location with the perfect small town look that they wanted. When Jeffrey Boehm wrote the script, he described it as, in the script, it says that it was set in New England as painted by Norman Rockwell. So they needed a very specific, like all-American small town. And it was actually to find that all-American small town, thanks to production designer Carol Spire, another longtime collaborator of Cronenberg's. She suggested that they shoot in a small town in Canada because she knew this small town. She felt that it had the look that they were going for. Of course, Cronenberg wasn't going to argue that. He's shot all of his films so far in Canada. He likes being in Canada. He likes bringing the production to Canadian workers. He likes shooting there and he likes being close to home. So it was ultimately decided that they would shoot there in a small town called Niagara-on-the-Lake, which is about 10 miles outside of Toronto, which is where Cronenberg lives. So this is like a 10-minute drive from his house, which is probably pretty convenient for him. So they shot at Niagara-on-the-Lake. It was shot almost entirely on location there, with only a small number of scenes shot on a soundstage, one of which was the little girl's room that catches on fire in Johnny's first vision. So that scene, when we talk about these Cronenberg movies, especially Videodrome, we've talked a lot about like the special effects and how they were created. Obviously, the special effects in this movie are going to be pretty tame in comparison to those movies, especially in comparison to Videodrome. But this sequence in particular was definitely the film's most ambitious effects wise. It was achieved by a special effects coordinator in the film, John G. Bellew was his name. Deborah Hill had selected him based on the strength of his work in Halloween 3. He'd been the special effects guy there. So for this sequence, he actually envisioned doing this all in one shot. He was sure that he could do it safely, all basically with a spinning camera showing the entire room so that you knew that this little girl was truly in danger. And he figured that he had found a way that he could do this, keeping the child safe, even having her on set with open flame. So I'm just going to read this next little bit verbatim. This is from that Cinefantastique article that was written by Tim Lucas. I was trying to just, as I was reading this article, I was like, how am I going to summarize this? You know what? Fuck it. I'm just going to read this verbatim from the book because otherwise it's just going to be me doing a Cliff's Notes version of this. So why not just give it to you in Tim Lucas's words?
Do it as
this is how
do it as Christopher Walken.
Because Tim, I can't do that. So Tim Lucas was on set when they were filming this scene initially. And he describes it saying, the camera is to start at the foot of Walken's hospital bed with a view of the hospital wall, part of the set behind him. The walls of the set are heated by bottled gas from behind, made of sheet metal and wallpaper. The walls buckled and are also covered with a special paint mixture that bubbles. When the wallpaper turns to the correct shade of brown, Bellew knows that the flashpoint has been reached and the camera is signaled to make a clockwise move to the side of Walken's bed. The fire is ignited from the base of the wall in view and is controlled to spread clockwise into the set. Effects technicians ignite the furniture as the camera travels, and after its clockwise rotation, the camera holds on the full shot of a dollhouse, which melts from flames rigged to shoot up from underneath. The dollhouse is tripped to fall forward towards the camera, clearing the view of the child actor hiding in the corner closet. So that was the way that they envisioned this. Like, you see the room burning, you start on Walken, you turn around, you see the flames engulf the room, you end on that dollhouse. The dollhouse falls forward from the heat, and behind that, you see a little girl in a closet screaming, terrified for her life. It's a pretty great shot. Of course, when they're filming this could be very dangerous, so there were a lot of safeguards for the scene. First of all, there were no synthetic materials on the set, so that there were no toxic fumes. The entire scene was overseen by an 11-man effects crew. And the closet where the child actor, her name's Julie Ann Heathwood, by the way, where she's sitting in this closet, it actually had an emergency escape hatch, and the entire closet section was on wheels. So if they had to wheel her away, if the flames started getting too close for comfort, they could wheel the entire section of the set that she's sitting in away. And then there's also a 5-man team of firemen on set.
Nice.
Walken's hospital bed in the scene, it worked not unlike the hollow couch that James Woods had to sit in for the stomach slit scene in Videodrome. Remember, we talked about that. So from the waist down, Walken is in a hole in the bed in a fireproof area below the stage where he can also escape to if he needs to in the event of the fire getting too close. The bottom half of him that we see in the bed is of course false. It's fake legs, basically everything from the waist down.
Well, they're on fire, so that's probably
they're on fire. And you also see that he looks like he is sweating in the scene, but he's actually got his face and hands treated in an inflammable solution. It's actually Zell gel. Remember Gary Zeller, the guy who did the head explosion scene from Scanners? He invented this stuff called Zell gel, and they're using it on another Cronenberg movie here for Christopher Walken, which is kind of cool. And then Heathwood, she was assisted in the scene, like she was kind of coached and made sure she was okay by the film's stunt coordinator, which is the incredibly named Dick Warlock. Gary, I have to ask you, do you know who Dick Warlock is?
Oh,
bit
yeah.
of trivia for Gary.
I was about to say, haven't we mentioned him before? But I guess that was an old.
That was on the old show. Yep.
Yeah, but no, he's a regular John Carpenter buddy, and of course he is Michael Myers in Halloween 2.
Yeah, he plays Michael Myers in Halloween 2. He also doubled for Richard Dreyfuss in Jaws and Kurt Russell in The Thing. So he's, he is a very well respected stunt coordinator. There's also just on a slight Dick Warlock tangent, and I'll be honest, I fully expected Gary to say, I'm something of a Dick Warlock myself, and I'm really disappointed that didn't happen.
I was waiting for the. I
don't know why I didn't say that. I'm disappointed in myself, to be honest.
I was waiting for the right moment to make a Dungeons and Dragons reference. I was like, yeah, they have a Dick Warlock in there.
But there is a scene that they filmed for this that they ended up cutting from the film that was supposed to open the movie, that showed Johnny as a kid at like at a hockey game, and it was supposed to suggest that Johnny had his powers from childhood. And he actually says something. What is he? I can't remember the exact words that he says, but he basically gives a warning that somebody's going to get hurt. And what happens in the scene is this guy's working on his car battery, and the car battery explodes and battery acid flies all over him. And Dick Warlock was the stuntman in that scene too. So anyway, just we all would need a little bit of extra Dick Warlock content in our lives. So there's an extra little story for you. But so if you're thinking about this,
aspiring Dick Warlocks out there,
so there's Dick Warlock. Is there also a Dick Wizard? Is that a different thing? Is there a difference?
There's Dick Warlock, Dick Wizard, and Dick Sorcerer.
And Dick Witch.
Yes. I mean, well, technically, I mean, that's just that's a female wizard, but yeah.
I mean, I've never played Dungeons and Dragons.
There's Dick Witch, there's Dick Hag.
Anyway, if you're listening to me describe the fire scene and you're thinking that I don't remember Christopher Walken being in a hospital bed on fire, well, that's because they had to shoot the scene a couple more times after that. They did it twice on the original day because there was a window that was supposed to implode from the heat, and it didn't really work on either take. Then Cronenberg starts watching the dailies and realized that the set dresser had put an ET doll on the dresser, and you see it burning, which could, of course, cause licensing issues. They'd have to get permission from Universal and Amblin and Steven Spielberg to actually use that. But he also felt that, like, even if we could get that, it's kind of distracting to the audience to see E.T. E.T. had just come out a couple years earlier, so it was very much in the public conscious. So they ended up filming the scene again later on, and they did it this time on an outdoor lot. They rebuilt the set outdoors, and this time when they redid it, the hospital bed was never used, so you only see Walken in the little girl's bed.
Yeah, there's so many scenes that they ended up not using in this movie, and I think they're like lost to time or something.
There are still images from some of them, but not the entire scene.
There was the one where Christopher Walken falls into the water with the ice skating group or something, and there's stuff where like he spent like 3 days there, like diving in the water, and like none of that ever got used.
Well, I think that they initially, they wanted to put Christopher Walken into Johnny's visions, and you do see that. You see it especially in the fire scene, but you see it in the gazebo scene a little bit. You see him standing there because he's overlooking it, which is why he kind of freaks out afterwards, saying, I did nothing. I saw him and I did nothing. He goes on this kind of rant. But I think they felt that they were overdoing it a little bit they didn't want to use that gimmick too much, So I think the scene you're talking about is when he sees Chris falling through the ice, his kid that he's tutoring, and they just felt like that was, we got the point across by showing it these two previous times.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier that the town that they shot in, Niagara on the Lake.
Yeah.
One of the big things there, just if you're one of the things there, if you're curious, is that Niagara on the Lake is, that town's still there. They argued about the gazebo being built there, and Cronenberg told them that it would be very temporary, easily destroyed, and they built an actual gazebo. The town relented, but once the officials saw the gazebo, they loved it. And now it is still there. It's still available. It's Queens Royal Park Gazebo. And lots of people take their wedding photos there. You can rent it right now. It's still available. Also, nice. Christopher Walken's house is still there on location.
Well, the thing with the gazebo is that they I think they had to rework it a little bit because some of the materials they used were made to be temporary. So when the town decided they actually wanted to keep it, they had to like redo the roof and things like that to make it a more permanent thing. But yeah, Cronenberg says that they didn't want it at first, and now he gets sent like a brochure from Niagara on the Lakes, and the gazebo is like right on the front of the brochure. Like honestly, like I would love to visit the rape murder gazebo of Niagara on the Lakes.
I was into
why not get my wedding pictures taken there?
I was looking at it. I was like, wow, people are still right now taking their photos on that.
What if we kissed in the murder gazebo from the Dead Zone?
And I saw like a recent review where somebody was like, I went there, and then like a priest / minister or whatever owned the house that Christopher Walken lived in. You could go see the house, and just kind of interesting. Also, I saw this in a couple of places, and I couldn't find it on like the DVDs or anything, but apparently David Cronenberg had a 357 Magnum next to him, and was and this was at Christopher Walken's suggestion, that during the times where he had to like do the flinches for like the visions, David Cronenberg would fire that shit off.
Cronenberg mentions it in a couple of interviews on the Scream Factory Blu-ray, because he is very much not like a gun guy. He doesn't like guns. He's not like, but yeah, it was suggested to him to get some genuine reactions out of people. And so I mean it was shooting blanks, but yes, he would fire a gun to make people jump sometimes. So we mentioned Carol Spire. She was once again one of several crew members that Cronenberg brought from his previous films. Also back for The Dead Zone was cinematographer Mark Irwin, a assistant director John Board, and editor Ronald Sanders. But one key contributor on this one that is conspicuously missing is Howard Shore. This wasn't really Cronenberg's decision. He did not want Howard Shore. It was actually a studio mandate. They wanted a more well-known composer on the film. To De Laurentiis, he figured if they had a more well-known composer, they would sell more copies of the soundtrack album. De Laurentiis is above all a businessman.
Yeah. He say he knows how the Halloween soundtrack sells.
Right. Yeah. They initially hired a French composer named Michel Legrand. But when Legrand discovered that he was only going to be given 8 weeks in which to supply a full score for a 65 to 70 piece orchestra, he's like, nah, I'm out. Like, I'm not doing that. Once he was gone, Cronenberg pitched Howard Shore again, and De Laurentiis reluctantly agreed. Shore flew to Toronto to spot the film with Cronenberg and editor Ronald Sanders. Spotting, by the way, if you're not familiar with the term, that's where a composer and a director, and often the editor, will kind of pinpoint those moments in the film that will require music. So they go through the movie and they're like, okay, this is this, and this. Legrand had spotted the film as well when he was working on it. Then Howard Shore spent 3 weeks actually writing the score for the film before De Laurentiis panicked at the still unsigned contract, as Shore had not signed his contract yet, and he quickly signed another composer. As Cronenberg said, he said, quote, the best and most concise way of explaining what happened is that the deal wasn't able to be made. So Shore wasn't like not chosen or fired. He was basically never like officially hired on the film. There was never a contract signed. And, so the composer that De Laurentiis ended up going with was a guy named Michael Kamen. Michael Kamen had received accolades for his work on Pink Floyd The Wall. Nice. I see Todd nodding and smiling because I know you're a big Pink Floyd fan. But yeah, he did all the orchestral stuff in that, as well as the 1981 film Venom, which stars Oliver Reed, and was almost directed by Tobe Hooper before he got fired off of it because I think he was doing a lot of cocaine.
Venom, Tom Hardy and Tobe Hooper is a perfect combination.
He had reportedly written the Venom score in only 9 days, so they knew this guy could work fast. And by the time he came onto the Dead Zone, he had about 3 weeks to deliver a completed score for the film.
He works like all night long. And so, yeah, I mean, the only thing I saw from Michael Kamen was that he was in London working on the score. He was working on his piano in his house, and said he received several complaints from his neighbors.
He's working all hours.
Please stop playing that music. We can't sleep, and it's giving my family nightmares.
The thing is, like, I think that this movie, I think the score is really good. I think Michael Kamen's score is really good. Michael Kamen, you know, he would go on to be a major composer. He unfortunately passed away at a fairly young age. I think he was in his 50s. But he did, you know, gosh, he did Lethal Weapon. He did Bryan Singer's X-Men movies. Like he's done some like major films. He's a big time composer, but his score is definitely much more traditional than what Howard Shore was doing at the time with other Cronenberg movies. And I think that it does add to the whole vibe of the movie a good bit. I mean, I think this movie feels a little less Cronenbergian than many of the other films that we've talked about.
That's fair.
And I think a big contributor to that is the score. It makes it feel more Hollywood. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's considerably different than what we've heard from Howard Shore, who was much more experimental at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're talking a lot of shit for a guy who one of his main features was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, which included him working with the great Bryan Adams, and he wrote "Everything I Do It for You."
Did he
Bryan
really?
Adams, yeah. So
well, he also
let's not take that away from Michael Kamen.
He also did Mr. Holland's Opus, and then he started like a nonprofit based on his work on that film. So he did good stuff. I mean, but it's just very different than what Howard Shore was doing.
The Canadian government has repeatedly apologized for Bryan Adams.
So I do have to mention a couple other things about the filming while we're talking about the actual filming of the movie. One thing is the screaming tunnel. Gary, in your research, did you find anything about the screaming tunnel?
I don't know that I saw that. No.
Okay, so the screaming tunnel is the tunnel that when Johnny starts working with Bannerman to try to find the Castle Rock killer, he takes him to this tunnel. It's a very iconic scene from the movie. They go in this dark tunnel. It's a really cool scene visually as well. They apparently coated the walls with they sprayed it down with water, knowing that the cold temperatures would ice it over. So it's got this really cool reflective look to it. This was apparently like a record cold winter in Ontario, which for Ontario is saying something when they were filming this. Which contributes a lot to the look of the film, that like cold, like gray look to it. But then during filming, they also had like some of their like record warm weather, and they had to bring in fake snow for some scenes. But anyway, during this scene, it was freezing. They were spraying down the walls to get that sheen from the ice on the walls. It looks really cool. It's a really memorable moment from the film. It's often used on posters and things like that. I'm wearing a Dead Zone t-shirt right now that prominently features that scene on it.
Does it feature Christopher Walken's collar?
Yep. Look.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah.
So the tunnel that they filmed that in, I can't remember the name of the real tunnel, but it's in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and it is known by the locals as the Screaming Tunnel, which is not a place that you ever want to visit anywhere called the Screaming Tunnel.
Well, that's what Todd calls his butthole.
So just a little further about rectal health, kids.
There are a lot of stories about the tunnel, but and they've changed over the years and got more sensational or whatever. But the gist is that there was apparently a young girl who was burned alive. Whether, some stories say there was a house fire. Others say that her father went mad and set her on fire. That's probably the least sensational version of that is probably what's closer to the truth. But she died in that tunnel. Like she was running, collapsed, and died burnt alive in this tunnel. Oh. And according to locals, it's haunted. This tunnel is haunted. And they say that when they were filming this scene, that like weird things would happen, like power would go off. Their cameras started like freezing over, and they had them, of course, insulated for the cold, but like everything that could go wrong during the filming of this scene, things started happening. This wasn't something that was happening over the course of the film as a whole, but specifically while they were filming in the Screaming Tunnel. Wow. And it's called the Screaming Tunnel because people say it after midnight, you can hear the girls' screams.
Oof. Like,
so anyway,
Todd's
if you want to visit
butthole.
another cool movie location while you're visiting the Rape and Murder Gazebo in Niagara on the Lake, head a couple miles down the road and go visit the Screaming Tunnel.
Or Todd's butthole.
Or visit Todd's butthole.
Which has also been sprayed down to get that really cool sheen.
Yeah, shiny.
This is not okay.
Another fun bit of trivia from the filming. So when you see the newscast that Johnny's watching, the one that eventually convinces him to help with tracking down the Castle Rock killer, initially when they filmed that, you were supposed to see like some photos of the kid, the high school student. They mentioned that she's like a sophomore in high school. You're supposed to see photos of her in the newscast, and they took photos. And the girl that they took photos of was a girl named Kathy Scorsese. It's a 17-year-old daughter of Martin Scorsese, who, Martin Scorsese and David Cronenberg at this point have become friends. And she had actually spent a week on the set of The Dead Zone studying the art of special effects with John Bellew. So she was there to kind of learn, and they decided to use her for this scene. Of course, they ended up getting cut from the film, but I thought that was a fun bit of trivia as well.
That's cool.
So after filming wrapped, Cronenberg takes an early edit of The Dead Zone to New York, where he screened it for De Laurentiis and for Stephen King. After the screening, he had a long discussion with King about the film, which he says proved to be pretty helpful as he continued editing, especially as he was shaping the scene where Stilson picks up the child at the political rally. So in the cut that King saw initially, John sees Stilson using the kid as a shield, but he decides to shoot anyway. And King didn't like this because he felt like Johnny was willing to shoot through the baby to get to Stilson. And while this could be seen as kind of a necessary sacrifice to save millions of people from nuclear disaster, King kind of thought it looked bad for the guy that was supposed to be the hero of the film, and Cronenberg agreed with him. So they edited the scene slightly. They waited until Stilson falls back and Sarah grabs the baby from him, and then they edited in the shot where Johnny fires the rifle. So it appears that the child is safely out of harm's way. In the book and in the original script, it was actually just a random kid that Stilson used in that scene, by the way. It was on the day that they were shooting the scene, Christopher Walken actually suggested that it should be Denny, Sarah's kid. So they didn't have the same baby as before. Plus, this is several months down the line in the timeline of the film. So they kind of had to find a kid on the set who kind of looked like Denny to use in the scene. When you watch the credits of the film, you actually see a couple of different Dennys that are credited throughout. But that was kind of an on-the-set improvisation, which I can't imagine it any other way, honestly.
Yeah.
So King actually told Cronenberg that he preferred a lot of the changes that were made to the decisions that he'd made while writing the book. So, for example, in the book, the kid that Johnny is tutoring, his name's Chuck, I think in the book. His name's Chris here. He's like a 17 or 18-year-old rich kid with a Corvette and a swimming pool, which is kind of a harder character to sympathize with, this privileged rich kid who's got it all because his daddy's rich. So Cronenberg and Boehm decided to make him a younger kid, someone who would remind Johnny of himself at that age a little bit more, and it makes him a lot more sympathetic. Also in the book, Johnny predicts a fire in a gym, which Cronenberg and Boehm changed to the hockey accident that he predicts that Chris is going to be in, because he felt that the gym fire was just a little too close to the finale of Carrie, which I would have to absolutely agree with.
Would make perfect sense. Yeah,
it seems a little redundant. So, and King liked these changes. He thinks that Cronenberg actually improved on his original story, which is pretty high praise coming from Stephen King. It's not the first time he's or it's not the only time he said that. I remember him saying the same thing about Frank Darabont's ending to The Mist, which is one of the more famous downbeat endings of all time in a movie. But that was not the ending of the original story. And Stephen King actually, I remember when that came out, him saying like, I wish I'd written it that way. That's a much better ending than my story. So Dead Zone was released in October of 1983, just 10 days before Halloween. That was actually on purpose. They wanted to release it close to Halloween because it's a horror movie, or at least it was viewed as a horror movie when they greenlit it. But, this was, after all, a David Cronenberg movie that was an adaptation of a Stephen King book. Of course, it's a horror movie. But then De Laurentiis started getting concerned when the film screened for preview audiences. The audiences, they responded very positively to it. It got like a 96% rating from audiences at the preview screenings, but the audiences did seem to view it as more of an earnest drama with supernatural elements than as a straight up horror film, which kind of caused De Laurentiis to rethink his entire marketing strategy for the film. His original trailers had sold it as a horror film, as more effects heavy. I'm sure that they probably featured the fire scene and things like that. And he felt that, if audiences saw this, they're going to expect a different movie than what they're getting, which I think is a great instinct to have as a producer, to be honest, because how many times have we seen a movie that is not what the trailers have sold? Well,
and
regularly.
And these names involved. I mean, you gotta
exactly
try to be ahead of this as much as you can.
Yeah. So he did. He had brand new trailers cut, brand new marketing campaign for the film that would kind of less overt in selling the film as a horror film. And the change worked. Whatever he did, it worked. The film made nearly $21 million at the box office on a budget of somewhere between $7 and $10 million, depending on where you read it. That's 10 times what Videodrome made at the box office. Nice. If you think about it that way. It was, at the time of its release, the most financially successful Cronenberg film so far. It actually still ranks as his fourth highest grossing film overall. Eastern Promises is number one at this point. And then ahead of this, I think you've got History of Violence is number one. Then you've got Eastern Promises and The Fly, and then this. Critical response was pretty favorable as well. There were some mixed notices for sure, but there were also some very positive reviews from some of the country's top critics, including Roger Ebert, who's been a little hit or miss on Cronenberg so far. But he gave this a very positive review. I think he gave it 3.5 out of 4 stars, if I remember right. Some Cronenberg purists thought that he had stepped a little too far from the kinds of films that he'd become known for. He had gone Hollywood, some of them thought. And there were some Stephen King purists who felt that he'd strayed too far from the source material. But overall, the film was pretty well liked by audiences and critics alike.
Well, think about, we just talked about the inflation calculator. And it's like over 4 times as much money. So it's like $100 million movie.
Right.
Essentially. I don't know. And that just blows my mind just hearing you talk about it. And based on what we talked about earlier, I'm like, shit. It
was a huge hit.
Made a lot of money.
$21 million in 1983 box office dollars is a lot of money.
Yeah,
it really is. And so what has happened at this point, Cronenberg's been trying to break into the mainstream. And after making what's probably his weirdest movie with Videodrome, at least weirdest so far, he makes a couple down the line that might be a little bit weirder than Videodrome, but so far, Videodrome is definitely his weirdest, and then he immediately goes into what is certainly his most, or one of the most mainstream films that he would ever make in his entire career. But modern audiences might have a different view of this. I think that overall it's pretty well liked, but I'm sure there's some people out there who have something negative to say about this one.
Oh, for sure. This movie's a little long, and so maybe some people just stayed up past their bedtime to watch it, and it sounds like they did, and they now need a nap. That was a reach. I get it.
No, that's okay.
The movie's not even that long. Really, it's like a normal length movie. It's like an hour and 45 minutes.
Maybe
long.
It feels long to them, Justin.
That's what she said.
Nice. Well done.
I can't believe we're still laughing at That's What She Said jokes.
All
All right, so I'll do this as per Todd's request. Justin also sent me some stuff this time, which is weird because we both have Letterboxd, and I definitely didn't see these, which is
these kind of stood out to me, and I thought that they might be fun.
I don't think I have them. It's just weird to me, like because I feel like I scrolled through all of Letterboxd. I also go through IMDb and Amazon and just see what users out there on the internet have something. But here we go. This is from the IMDb. Only a few minutes into this movie, I started feeling uneasy about the movie. It was not well done. It was even far below average, but a Walken fan as I am, I kept watching. Nothing turned to the better, though. It just turned to the worse. Not even Walken, the best among actors, could make this movie bearable. That is what that person said.
I like that.
Nice.
I like thinking of that review as being written by Christopher Walken, because it does shit on the movie, but continuously praises him. And I like to think that he's writing that about himself.
This review's from Suzanne. She says, worst movie I've seen in quite some time. The acting is revolting. Script horrible. Do yourself a favor and stay away from this movie. Jose says, the movie was very good. I really like Christopher Walken. Can't stomach left-wing wingnut Martin Sheen. I could read between the lines. This movie's from 1983. I saw it recently. I see very silly and unnecessary jabs at Reagan. Luckily, Reagan was the best president this country's ever had.
Oh, no.
The movie starts off great with Walken being this teacher, crashing his car, falling into a coma, waking up after 5 years and seeing and feeling things from the past, present, and then later the future. Needless to say, it makes me happy knowing that people at this time and era were and are wrong about Reagan. He ended up... He ended the Cold War, and the only danger was from the USSR. Sadly, this film, which has so much potential, messes up by introducing a small political anti-missile agenda in there towards the end, no matter how subtle. In my mind, it is propaganda and made a good movie like The Dead Zone Week, which reminds me of Stephen King's movie, The Mist, which later on also messed up the end.
That review is filled with bad opinions of various kinds. But also the thing about him talking so much about that is that this book was written 2 years before Ronald Reagan was elected president. So and all of that shit about Craig Stillson is in the book. Not only that, but in the book, there's actually a joke where Johnny Smith predicts that Ronald Reagan will never become president, which of course he was wrong about, or Stephen King was wrong about, but that's actually a moment in the book, like where they, because he was governor of California at the time, where they actually, Stephen King via Johnny Smith predicts that there's no way anyone would ever vote Reagan into presidency. So I don't see how that could possibly be any sort of commentary on Ronald Reagan. Man, talk about projecting.
This review's from Letterboxd. It's from a person named Peach Out. Christopher Walken ended authoritarianism.
The whole review. Thanks.
That's
Chris.
what she said. I don't know. McMahon 96 says, I have a strange compulsion to watch all Stephen King adaptations, despite A, I don't like any of his film adaptations, and B, I don't like any of his books. I just want to be included. This is getting harder to do. I feel like I'm becoming a parody of my parody.
You don't have to continue.
At the end of this next one, wait a beat and then under your breath, call him a putz. That works.
This next review is from Maria.
she says, nah, this is not for me. I thought I loved Cronenberg, and after watching Videodrome, I don't know, every single movie I've watched from him is a little more disappointing than the other, except Naked Lunch and that one with the two brothers. Putz. All right. I'm going to stop Christopher Walken for a minute.
I like this one from Jack of Heart. 1.5 stars. Better than Predator, I guess. Worse than Johnny Mnemonic.
Wow. I don't even know. I don't even have a response to that.
I don't know what you say to that. This one made me laugh out loud, and my wife made me read it to her, and then she didn't get it, but maybe you guys will appreciate it more. This is from John. 1.5 stars. The filmic equivalent of a limp-wristed handshake. Cronenberg's Dead Zone adaptation, Butcher's King's marvelously paced novel with all the grace of Christopher Reeve navigating an assault course.
Wow. Yikes. Yikes. That was offensive.
Wow.
We do not condone such language here on Cinema Shock.
I'm sorry, but I did.
Wow.
I was like, wow, this person.
Savage.
And then here's the one Justin sent me. This is from Jeff. He says, what a boring fucking movie and a boring fucking book. I actually read the fucking book, and it was a long one, and it was fucking boring. And then I saw the movie, and it was also really fucking boring, except for Christopher Walken.
That one was written by Christopher Walken.
Yeah. Let's see. Here's it doesn't matter. 1 star. The movie just sucks all around. I can't believe the script is based on a book by one of the most celebrated horror authors. It's as lazy and amateurish as a high school student film. 3 acts with 3 simple, almost bedtime stories. No connection between them. No inner logic whatsoever. People in this movie act and talk as if they're 4-year-olds. It's pretty creepy in its attitude towards kids, like Bill Cosby creepy, not horror movie creepy.
I don't even know what that means.
I don't know.
And finally, we'll finish with Christopher Walken. This is from Eli.
This review is from Eli. He gives it 1 star. He says, I didn't finish this because I got too bored and Christopher Walken scares me.
Oh, man.
And I should.
Oh, so it wasn't universally beloved, or isn't these days, I guess. But, you know, it is. I think it's widely considered one of the better Stephen King adaptations, even to this day. I think it's a really good movie myself. And I do think it's probably Cronenberg's most commercial film, at least up to this point. It's definitely his most commercial film. There could be an argument, I think, later on for like Eastern Promises and History of Violence, maybe. But I think this is one of his more commercial films. But I know that, Gary, you said you've seen this, but it's been a few years. Todd, was this a first time viewing, or was this a...
This was a first time viewing. I really enjoyed it. It's
I thought you might like this one a little bit better. This just seemed a little bit more up your alley than maybe Videodrome to me.
Yeah. I kind of
sometimes you surprise me though, so who knows?
Yeah, no, I know I tend to be a bit of a wild card, but it's definitely funnily enough, it made me want to go read the book.
Yeah, which
is rare for me.
Yeah, Todd. I mean, you famously don't know how to read, so
that's true. I which is impressive because all of my stand-up comedy is actually done with stick figures, and I just sort of describe
hieroglyphs.
Yep. But this actually did want to make me want to, visit the source material and, dive into it a little bit more. It was really good. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it's an excellent book. I've been, it actually made me want to revisit the book because it's been quite a few years since I read it. But Gary, what did you think watching it after many years?
I think the movie's okay. I don't love it. I think it's, I'm happy to have it. I think it's I can see where some people would feel like it's I don't know. It feels like it feels more like it should be in. It should be like a TV series, honestly. Like what a lot of people have thought. Like it feels like there's a lot of different stories like shoved into this one movie. So I feel like it never gives enough depth to any one section of it. I don't think it's bad by any means. I think it's pretty good. But I honestly would say like 3.5, 4 stars. Maybe.
If this were a movie that you were watching, having no prior knowledge of David Cronenberg or his filmography, what would that tell you? Like, what would that make you compelled to watch his other stuff, or does it feel to you like a little bit more of a journeyman director?
It feels like more of a journeyman director to me. Like I don't feel like there's anything that stands out necessarily. That
there's nothing wrong with journeyman directors, by the way. It's just that some people have a distinct style and some
I would never know
the
this
material.
I don't know that I would know this is David Cronenberg.
Because that's a lot of a lot of the criticism that I've seen towards it. And like I said before, this movie is pretty well liked overall, but I feel like a lot of the criticism has been that this doesn't feel as much like a Cronenberg movie than some of his other stuff, especially the other ones that we've talked about here, which have a lot of kind of signature Cronenbergian elements to them.
There's cool stuff. I mean, the aesthetic feels good. It's not a bad movie at all. Like it's a pretty good movie, but it's like I don't know. I guess in the context of the series we're doing, it's definitely not my favorite Cronenberg movie. I think I still lean The Brood. I don't think anything's topped The Brood so far for me.
Yeah.
And I know that's a weird thing to say. Like I feel like that's out of the normal, but when we've done like Videodrome, but like even Videodrome, I'm feeling like that's the most Cronenberg movie, but I don't really feel like that's the most Cronenberg movie, honestly. Like I feel like it's the most like excessive on one end Cronenberg movie.
Yeah. I mean, I see that, like how I understand the argument that this is, at least at first glance, the least Cronenbergian film of this era. I almost hesitated when we were planning this series. I almost hesitated to include it because it didn't really fit into that body horror label.
Literally, when I finished it the first time, or this time, I mean, when I finished it, I rewatched it like in the background a few times. But one of the first thoughts I had was like, you could have excluded this almost just as much as you could have like the other one.
But I also the Fast Company. I also feel like this is a major turning point in his career as a commercial artist because it was so successful. It's also one of the first like early major Stephen King adaptations. So I think it does have a pretty important place in genre film history, which is kind of our thing, you know. But also
even talking about it during this episode, finding out it's like $100 million film, essentially. You know, I'm like,
you can't overlook it.
Yeah, I was like, this was a big deal. This is
and also though, watching it like in succession with his other films, I think this is as much body horror as Scanners is. Both of those movies are about the power of the mind. You know, if it were not for the head exploding scene and the kind of makeup effects in that final scene of Scanners, I don't think that could be considered body horror because it's really about the mind. But in Cronenberg's world, we've said this before, I think on the Scanners episode, the mind and the body aren't separate entities. They're intrinsically linked. For Cronenberg, horror of the mind is body horror because the mind is part of the body, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for I'm not what's the words I'm looking for here? It's not lost on me the connections to Scanners. I mentioned that earlier. I wonder if that's why he was considered for this movie or like first thought of for this movie. And it's interesting because it's a reversal on some of his things. It's actually I had considered that it's opposite. In Scanners is your powers are used proactively against the world, and in this one,
whereas here they're happening to Johnny.
Yeah, they're happening to Johnny because of his powers. There's the political aspect of it that I think is still there. It just felt like there was other stuff I was thinking about with it that that I thought it was interesting in this one. The doctor that brings Christopher Walken back is like such a good dude and stays
very
a good
different
dude.
from doctors in every other Cronenberg
I was
movie.
like, Cronenberg's normal thing is like these would be the guys that started this whole process.
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of like his MO, is that like evil scientists causing things to go amok, even all the way up to Videodrome. This seems like the turning point where scientists or doctors become the main characters of the film, because we're going to see that again with Jeff. I mean, not that he's a main character here, but it's more of a transitional thing, because you go forward and you've got Jeff Goldblum as the protagonist of The Fly, and even Dead Ringers, which, of course, they're doctors as well, and the main focus of that film. I do also think that you could say that The Dead Zone isn't horror at all. And I would not argue anyone who said that. I don't think it's really a horror film. But we've said that over the course of this series, that a lot of these films that are considered David Cronenberg's body horror films are really more sci-fi than horror. I mean, Scanners especially. And I think that they only get categorized as horror because of some of their more sensational elements, like the head exploding scene, which makes for a great cover image on the cover of Fangoria, but it doesn't make that a horror movie.
Yeah, I think
Scanners
you're right.
is a sci-fi movie. The Dead Zone is a sci-fi movie, or I would even call the Dead Zone a thriller with some supernatural elements.
Yeah, it's 100% that way. And that's the way he's going to go. I mean, it's going to be, it's hard when you've got movies like Videodrome, and then we're about to talk about The Fly, which for sure just has some wild shit in it. But his tendencies lean more towards this kind of thing. They really do. And even with, like you said, Scanners, it's only really the exploding head that gets you there. But I mean, he's going to go more into like things like Eastern Promises or History of Violence, and even Dead Ringers, as far as I remember, is not. I mean, nothing's like overtly horror about what he does.
Well, and I think that's one of the reasons why it's considered less Cronenbergian than some of his other films. When you compare it to something like Videodrome or even Scanners, it definitely, The Dead Zone comes across as a little more low key. It's less sensational. It's more straightforward. And just flat out, it's a more straightforward narrative and more straightforward filmmaking on Cronenberg's part. He's not trying to be on the cover of Gorehound with this one,
Even when I talk about The Brood, by the way, which is a straight up horror movie, I mean, nothing's like sensational about that movie till the end.
Until she eats the fetus.
Yeah.
Licks the fetus.
Right. Yeah.
But when you view it in the context of other Cronenberg films, which of course is what we're doing on this whole series, I do think that you start to see some of his signatures throughout The Dead Zone, because you kind of alluded to this, Gary, much like Cameron Bell and Scanners, Johnny's powers have isolated him from the rest of the world. That seems to be a major theme in Cronenberg's work. We're going to see it again with The Fly, I think. Johnny's powers have isolated him from the rest of the world, and they become a burden. They become a curse that drives him away from the life that he knew before his accident. Because before his accident, he was just an average guy. He was an everyman. I think that's pretty explicit. His everymanness is very explicit in the name that Stephen King gave him, Johnny Smith, and he appears to be pretty happy. He's got a girlfriend, maybe a fiance, he's in love. He's got a job that he seems to enjoy. I do love, by the way, that he assigns his students The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, knowing that, a decade and a half later, he would be the Headless Horseman for Tim Burton. I think that's kind of fun.
You guys keep stealing my notes.
But, in those early scenes of Christopher Walken, of Johnny, there doesn't seem to be an ounce of cynicism in this guy. Like, he seems genuinely happy. And a lot of that is predicated on Walken's performance. Like, all those reviews that we read earlier, even the ones that, like, like were shitting on the film, people were still like, yeah, but Christopher Walken's pretty great. And he's really great in that. I think in the way he plays those early scenes, Gary, you mentioned this before as well, but the way he plays those early scenes, he's very easygoing, very affectionate with Sarah, he's living a comfortable life. But after the wreck, after he awakens from his 5-year coma, Walken completely changes how he plays the character, not just physically. In those early scenes, he's got the doofus haircut where the hair's down. He's got glasses and he's smiling all the time. But then afterwards, haircut. it's a really bad haircut. But then afterwards, his hair's like it's the typical Christopher Walken hair. It looks like he just stuck his finger in a light socket, and he looks a little more gaunt, a little more skeletal almost, and he's shaken. He speaks less confidently. He lashes out angrily at people. He has reasons to be angry. I mean, you totally understand. But even when he reconnects with Sarah, a lot of the warmth that we see in those earlier scenes is gone. Like, this is a guy who's been fundamentally changed, not only by the accident itself, but by the toll that these visions have taken on him, both physically and mentally. And I think that's something that we see a lot in Cronenberg films. So even though on the surface, this doesn't seem like a typical Cronenberg film, these are things that you see in a lot of his work, I think. And I do think this is a phenomenal performance from Christopher Walken. This is before Walken had become more of a meme than a man that he is now. This is before, the more cowboy, before all of his numerous appearances on SNL, which are great. This is before he kind of became a walking parody of himself. This is the Christopher Walken who had just won an Oscar a couple of years prior, I mean, you do see a little bit of the Christopher Walken that we know now peek out every now and then, famously in the ice is going to break scene.
How's Gary, it go, Gary?
If you don't mind.
The ice is going to break. I think that did that more aggressively.
It was, but it's okay. But while Johnny, he never gets full control of his powers like Cameron Vale does in Scanners. There's no ephemeral here to help him keep his visions at bay. He still kind of ends up accepting it, just like Cameron Vale did, and finding a way to do good with them, even if no one ever knows, and even if it means sacrificing his own life. And I think that treatment of the character of Johnny is also a big part of why The Dead Zone is one of the best Stephen King adaptations. I alluded to this at the beginning of the episode, but so while The Shining's always going to probably be my favorite movie based on a Stephen King book. It's my favorite horror movie of all time. I absolutely adore The Shining. That is a great Stanley Kubrick film, not a great Stephen King adaptation. Stephen King fucking hates it. He hates what Kubrick did with it. And I get it, because it's a very, very loose adaptation of that book. But The Dead Zone's even though it has to cut stuff out, it captures the essence of Stephen King's book a lot better, I think. And I think that what it does better than most Stephen King adaptations is that it behaves as a character study first and foremost, which is why I think that, Gary, you mentioned earlier, Jeffrey Boehm said that Stephen King missed the point of his own book when he wrote his adaptation, because he was focusing in his script on the sensational stuff, the Castle Rock killer stuff, right? But the point of the book and the point of what we finally got in the movie is Johnny Smith's growth and his transformation as a person. A lot of King's stuff, even the stuff that was being released around this time in the 1980s, during the kind of the golden age of Stephen King adaptations, they were always in a rush to get to the rabid dogs, the vampires, the fire starting kids. They wanted to get to those sensational elements, but King's work has always been very rich in character study. And I think the best Stephen King adaptations tend to do the same, which is why I think something like Mike Flanagan's work does so well, is because those are character-based films, because he gets what Stephen King's doing. And I think Cronenberg and Boehm understand Stephen King's work better than a lot of the filmmakers from this time do. This is a movie. It's a movie about Johnny Smith. Yeah, it's about a guy who has psychic powers, who uses them to fight evil, but ultimately it's about a guy who's tormented by those powers, who's learning to accept them and do good with them, personal consequences be damned. And I think for me, I think that's why this works as a Stephen King adaptation, even if it feels a little bit like an outlier in Cronenberg's filmography. And I understand why people see it as an outlier, because if you look at his filmography, it's right in between Videodrome and The Fly, probably his two most sensational films, you know? So I get that. But I do think it's in line with some of the films that Cronenberg would make later in his career. So if you look at his filmography as a whole, this movie does not, it does not feel like it's not at home with movies like Spider, A History of Violence, and Eastern Promises, all of which are complex character dramas with a focus more on the psychological, which I think is exactly what The Dead Zone does. And now people view Cronenberg as the guy who made these type of movies, and they're a little more accepting of him doing that kind of stuff, because that's kind of what his career has turned into. Whereas, you know, a lot of fans in the early 80s, when this came out, strictly saw him as the body horror guy. And now, of course, in hindsight, we know that he's able to do a lot more than that.
Yeah, I mean, he's really proving here that he's a perfectly competent director with anything that you give him, which is great. I mean, David Cronenberg is a fantastic director. I guess I could just see, I can see people being put off by this movie initially, like when you go in expecting one thing, and you cover this with Dino De Laurentiis, like even getting that from the screenings and that sort of thing, that he had to, switch gears and adjust his promotion of the movie, which made perfect sense, because I think a lot of people are probably revisiting this movie, even in some of the reviews we read, where they're revisiting this as like, it's the Fly guy. And
right.
He's making, a Stephen King movie. This is going to get wild. And it's not like, it's pretty evenly paced movie. I mean, it's good though. I mean, I think everything in the movie works. So anything I'm saying is not knocking the movie as like a bad movie, because it's certainly not. And then the vibe and the aesthetic and everything work perfectly. David Cronenberg is an excellent director. And he's just proving that he's more than what his reputation is.
Yeah, I agree. And I guess we would be remiss if we didn't mention the Dead Zone TV series here. Gary mentioned it a little bit earlier, I think, but and you also mentioned that this kind of feels like it should be a TV series, but because it is episodic, and the series wasn't exactly a remake of the film. It was more of like a based on the novel and a readaptation of the novel, but it starred Anthony Michael Hall as Johnny Smith. It aired on the USA Network from 2002 to 2007, airing a total of 80 episodes before being canceled after a big cliffhanger finale at the end of its sixth season. And I don't think they ever rectified that. There was talk of them doing like a wrap-up movie or something, but that never happened. So, but it was pretty popular. More, it ran for much longer than I would expect it to, but there's been talk of remakes of this over the years, like there have been on almost all of these movies that we've talked about on this series so far. One thing we haven't really talked about much in detail on this series up to now is David Cronenberg's acting career, other than Todd mentioning the Star Trek thing every other episode.
Yeah.
Most of his acting roles have been pretty small and consist of just cameos, especially in his own films where he's often uncredited, if he appears at all. Although he has had some bigger roles in recent years, especially on television. We mentioned Star Trek, but he was also on Slasher last year. I think, Gary, you watched Slasher, didn't you?
Oh yeah. I love the Slasher series. I think it's great. But yeah, he has a big role in the most recent season.
Yeah, he was on Alias Grace for several episodes a couple years back. He was on Alias. I remember him being on Alias for a couple episode run back in the day. His biggest roles in feature films are probably in Jason X and Nightbreed, I would say. I did see him in To Die For, Gus Van Sant's To Die For. I rewatched that recently. He's in there. But aside from a small blink and you'll miss it cameo in Shivers, where he plays just one of the like infected people in a scene, I think just because they needed extra people, they needed more extras. The first time we really see Cronenberg on screen and the first time we hear his voice is in a feature film from 1985 called Into the Night, directed by his friend John Landis. So in this film, Cronenberg plays a supervisor of a group of aerospace engineers. I think it's fitting that Cronenberg would play a scientist in his first on-screen role, since scientists have been, and science itself has been such a big part of his work. And he just has that vibe. I think he plays a scientist or a doctor of some sort in most roles where he's got a significant part. This is a movie that I was not very familiar with as part of John Landis's filmography. But Cronenberg, if you look it up, he is one of many, many very strange cameos in the film, which also features scenes starring Dan Aykroyd, Rick Baker, Paul Bartel, who was a part of the whole part of the whole Roger Corman camp. Director Don Siegel, who did Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original. Carl Perkins, the Carl Perkins, Blue Suede Shoes, Carl Perkins. Nice. Jim Henson has a cameo in it. Creature from the Black Lagoon director Jack Arnold, Barbarella director Roger Vadim, Empire Strikes Back writer Lawrence Kasdan, Silence of the Lambs director Jonathan Demme, Jaws screenwriter Carl Gottlieb, and David Bowie, who plays a knife-wielding assassin. And I really want to watch this movie just based on that list of names, because that's so bizarre to me. But the stars of the film are Michelle Pfeiffer and Jeff Goldblum, which of course is significant since this is where Cronenberg first came into contact with Goldblum. Goldblum would, of course, wind up starring in Cronenberg's next film, possibly his most popular film, which is going to be the subject of our final episode in this David Cronenberg series. On our next episode 2 weeks from now, we're wrapping things up on The New Flesh with the ultimate body horror film, David Cronenberg's The Fly. Woo! We've all seen this one, I think. It's definitely his most well-known film, I would say. This and I guess History of Violence are probably his most well-known films, but it is like the culmination of the body horror genre, I think. So it seems like a good one to wrap up on. So we'll be talking about that on our next episode. You can find it to stream online. Head to cinemashock.net if you want a link to all the places you can stream that. You can also find, of course, all of our episode archives on there, links to our merch, links to our Discord. Everything else you want to know about the show is there on our website at cinemashock.net. Where can you gentlemen be found on the internet?
If you like Star Trek, check out my podcast, the Computer Resume Podcast, where we cover the entire franchise in chronological order with a rotating panel of comedians, podcasters, actors, authors, and occasionally Star Trek alum. Available now wherever you get your podcasts and on all the socials at Computer Resume. And you can find me at Mr. Todd A. Davis on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and D&D Beyond.
I'm at This Is Gary Horne.
You don't have a whole speech rehearsed?
Yeah, I don't. You can find me there and get the rest.
I am at Justin_Bishop, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and you can find the show at Cinema_Shop on Twitter and Instagram, and we're also on Facebook. We're on Discord, all that stuff. Until next time,
may the wings of liberty never lose a feather,
and be excellent to each other.
What do you want to know? Do you want to know the future? You want to know if you have the keys? Is that it? You have the keys. I have the keys. You want to know if you're going to have the keys tomorrow? Is that right? You want to know why your sister took the keys herself? Thank you.
Of all the times that somebody says Johnny in this movie,
I know.
No, he left out Johnny.
Your wrap-up doesn't even use the word Johnny.
I know.
Wow. Todd, you continue to confound and surprise.
It's true.
I keep it fresh, fellas. I keep it fresh. So just before we wrap up, I did jot down a few things, and we did mention them briefly, but since you guys have already mentioned them, I'll just read them as Christopher Walken. In a movie about predicting the future, this movie does it twice. 16 years after his character assigned The Legend of Sleepy Hollow to his students, Christopher Walken would be cast to play the Hessian Horseman in 1999's Sleepy Hollow with director Tim Burton. But That same year, we would also see Martin Sheen begin one of his most notable roles as President Josiah Bartlett in Aaron Sorkin's The West Wing. From 1999 to 2006, for a total of 155 episodes, for which he won a Golden Globe, 3 SAG Awards, and was nominated for 6 Primetime Emmys. And
scene.
I'm going to need our listeners to vote on who does the better Walken impression. So that's going to be a poll. That's going to be a poll online on our Twitter or Instagram feed at some point after this episode drops.
For anybody who is curious, if you were disappointed that you never got the full reading of The Raven by Christopher Walken, you can get that on a double CD album called Closed on the Account of Rabies. It's one of the many produced by Hal Wilner.
Is that a real thing?
It's an Edgar Allan Poe tribute.
Oh my God.
I'm pretty sure it's also just on YouTube.
No, it was a double CD release.
But I mean, you can find him doing The Raven on YouTube.
Oh, yeah.
Like that recording.
But this has a lot of Edgar Allan Poe read by people.
Yeah.
Like Marianne Faithfull's on here, Iggy Pop.
Wow.
Jeff Buckley. This actually ended up being dedicated to Jeff Buckley and Allen Ginsberg, I think. Debbie Harry performs The City and the Sea.
What's the name of the album?
Gabriel Byrne does The Mask of the Red Death.
Wow.
It's called Closed on the Account of Rabies.
All right, I'm going to find that.
It's from 1997, but yeah, also on that album is Christopher Walken reading The Raven.
Nice. I love it.
Also, The Raven again in disc 2 is read by Abel Ferrara. So
that's very strange. You can stop recording now, Gary.
I won't.